Number 10. Shelby Coniglio. In May 2022, a deputy from the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department was arrested for having a few too many drinks before jumping behind the wheel. Everyone knows not to drink and drive, and if you're a police officer, then you should know better than anyone. But unfortunately for 26-year-old Shelby Elise Coniglio, she wasn't exactly thinking straight. Shelby was pulled over at about 1:37 a.m. In the report, the cop said that she was showing obvious signs of impairment. Her breath reeked of alcohol, she couldn't walk straight, and she was having a difficult time trying to hold a coherent conversation. To give the woman the benefit of the doubt, the officers administered multiple sobriety tests, but she failed each one. Finally, they got out a breathalyzer, and Shelby's results came back over 0.15. To put that into perspective, the legal limit in the state of Florida is only 0.08, so her blood alcohol concentration level was twice what it should have been. The former deputy was then taken to the local jail, and she was subsequently charged with a DUI. When news reached her employer, she was immediately fired. After all, the bare minimum requirement of being a cop is following the law. But this is more difficult for some officers than you'd think. Number 9. Celeste GUAP. After a man didn't answer the phone on a woman's birthday, she decided to air out the dirty laundry of over 32 different police officers. 18-year-old Celeste GUAP made a bit of money working as a prostitute. She'd been in the industry for a few years, meaning she was underage when she started. The phone call that sparked the scandal, though, took place on Celeste's birthday. She dialed one of the deputies that often hired her services, but he didn't pick up. Little did he know, she'd take this personally. When news got out in 2016 of so many policemen sleeping with a teenager, the community was shocked, to say the least. In the Oakland Police Department alone, 3 chiefs handed in a letter of resignation, and one man was so ashamed that he took his own life. The crazy thing is, Celeste claims that many cops are still asking to meet with her. She's admitted to feeling a bit guilty about what's happened in the aftermath, but remains adamant that everything was consensual. Celeste even says that only 3 out of 32 men paid her for the sexual favors. The reason she called Officer Brendan O'Brien was because she felt unsafe. That night, Celeste had been partying for her 18th birthday in Puerto Rico. Somehow, she found herself in a pretty rough neighborhood while intoxicated, and she was wearing a revealing swimsuit. She just wanted a little reassurance, so she called O'Brien, only to be ignored. Right after this, Celeste sent a message to his department. In Brendan's suicide note, which he left a few hours after the tip, he claimed that he was still reeling from the death of his wife during his relationship with Celeste. Even if he was grieving, he fully understood that what he was doing with Celeste, who was 17 when they met, was wrong. And so did all the other officers for that matter. The mayor of Oakland has since said the police department operates as if it was a frat house. Through an internal investigation, Mayor Libby Schaaf hopes to eradicate the toxic culture of macho masculinity polluting the force. Number 8. Christmas Spirit. 50-year-old Sergeant Patrick McHugh from Connecticut was put on administrative leave in December 2022 after a Christmas disaster. The man had apparently gotten into an argument with an unnamed woman, and things eventually turned violent. McHugh was even charged with disorderly conduct following the incident. But what exactly did he do? Well, it involves a tree. After drinking a bit with the girl in his home, the tone of things changed. Patrick apparently verbally berated her before fully picking up the Christmas tree and swinging. After making contact, he kept pursuing her into other rooms of the house. It's possible that Patrick and the woman were romantically involved because, in the police report, she claimed that he'd never behaved violently with her in the past. It seemed like she believed he simply had a momentary lapse in control and judgment. When officers got to the scene, they noticed that she had a noticeable red mark in the middle of her back, as if she'd been hit. McHugh said that he only pushed the tree, but this seems unlikely. He's declined further comment and even rejected a phone call after a reporter started asking questions. An investigation will soon be underway to get to the bottom of things, but so far, it's not looking good for Officer McHugh. Number 7. Stripper Life. While investigating a murder case, former Officer Eric Kelly from the Memphis Police Department made inappropriate advances toward a female defendant. Reports state that from the moment he met Bridget Stafford, The lieutenant made his intentions very clear. She claims that he repeatedly told her he wanted to be intimate, and at one point in an interrogation, Eric even asked the young woman if she worked in the sex industry. Bridget apparently responded by handing him a business card. After a few months, Eric called the number he'd been given. The two began a sexual relationship, and allegedly, the officer even helped Bridget get a job. But it wasn't exactly a decent career. He landed her a gig as a stripper. Evidence also showed that the man often sent her money, which paid for Bridget's outfits and illegal drugs. The secret affair went on for 8 months or so. The woman even had access to one of Eric's homes, where she would frequently spend the night. She could also get into the man's gun collection whenever she wished. Reports from the case Bridget was involved with claimed that on top of being a stripper, she was also a high-ranking gang member. When Eric's bosses found out about the extreme conflict of interest, they got ready to fire him. But before they formally could, he retired from the department on November 8, 2019. Through his actions, he put the murder investigation in jeopardy, as well as his future career in law enforcement. As part of a plea deal, Eric was sentenced to a year of diversion. Number 6. Officer Jesus. In early 2022, a 34-year-old former police officer named Jesus Menacol Jr. was sentenced to serve 3 years in prison. While still on duty, he used his badge and the power that came with it to take advantage of women as well as minors. Despite being married with 2 kids of his own, Menacol sexually harassed and abused young girls that he'd come in contact with. At least 4 victims have come forward claiming that the man forced himself on them in 2015. One of the victims was a 19-year-old woman who claimed she was just walking down the road one night in Hialeah, Florida, when Jesus drove up next to her. He stopped and told her it wasn't safe in the area after dark and that she shouldn't be out by herself. Then, Jesus offered to give her a ride. When the girl said no, he kept asking repeatedly until she finally agreed. But after the victim got into the car, he drove to a secluded dark alley and sexually assaulted her. Another woman was in shambles after being taken into custody. It was an extremely stressful situation for her, and she wasn't exactly in the best headspace. The officer took advantage of this and said he'd let her go if she gave him a favor. Once she complied, the victim wasn't released, but instead she was taken to a hospital where she was forced to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. These were just a few examples of the awful things he's done. Have you ever been mistreated by a police officer? Share your stories in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Number 5. Golden State Killer. During the 1970s and 80s, the Golden State Killer wreaked havoc across California in many different counties. He was responsible for the murders of at least 13 people, and he sexually assaulted dozens of others. But for decades, no one knew who he was. It wasn't until 40 years after his rampage that adequate DNA technology was able to identify him. After testing fluid that was taken from one of the victims, investigators uncovered the criminal, former police officer 74-year-old Joseph D'Angelo, in 2018. After 4 decades, the killer was finally arrested. During his trial, the families and loved ones of the people he'd brutally murdered made statement after statement about how Joseph's actions had affected them. Each of them individually shared how the man had traumatized their lives. His defense claimed that he was a loving father, but his sister would refute this by saying how he was often physically abusive. Those who didn't know this side of the man were shocked by what he'd done. Although he'd likely committed much more, Joseph pled guilty to 13 murders, 26 sexual assaults, and 13 kidnappings. After hearing about all the pain he'd caused in court, the man apologized for his actions. But apologies do little to erase the past. The elderly killer is now serving a life sentence in a remote prison facility. At the time of his arrest, he left a roast cooking in his kitchen. Now, every year on the anniversary of his capture, the families of his victims celebrate justice by being served with a feast. Number 4. BODYCAM. While on duty in Sunrise, Florida, a 21-year-old officer inappropriately berated a black male suspect after detaining him, a man named Gene Similian. That same day in March 2022, he told the police that he'd shoot them as he resisted being taken into custody. The sergeant in question, Christopher Police, responded with angry expletives. It's never appropriate to intimidate a person or threaten them with harm, But it's even worse for a cop to respond in the way police did. He yelled at him while holding the man against the patrol car, screaming, "I will remove your effing soul from your effing body." Another on-duty officer tried to pull police off the detainee by grabbing his belt, but he violently turned his anger toward her instead. He shoved her into the car by the throat, saying, "Don't ever effing touch me again." After this, he told the female cop that he'd speak with her in a few minutes. This entire exchange was recorded by a body cam. Since the incident, police was suspended while an investigation looked into things. At the scene of the crime, he was put into a patrol car himself after assaulting a fellow officer, and as of November 4th, he's formally retired after serving 21 years on the force. Number 3. Kevin Campbell. 33-year-old former Indiana police officer Kevin Campbell has been sentenced to 55 years behind bars for murder. In November 2015, a woman named Tiara Thomas was discovered bleeding and wounded by authorities. Later that day, she passed away from her injuries. Investigators saw that Tiara had been in contact with Campbell after looking through her phone records. It seemed like the two of them had recently been arguing over money for child support. A few days after Tiara's death, Officer Campbell was fired from the Hammond Police Department. It's believed that he killed the mother of his 3 children in order to get out of support payments. In the months before the murder, Campbell had apparently been struggling with his bills. It was so bad that collectors were after him, trying to get him to pay what he owed. Despite this evidence, Campbell has never once admitted to killing his former lover. In fact, he keeps saying that he'll do everything possible to find out who's truly responsible. The prosecuting attorney thought this statement was ridiculous and that the killer should just own up to what he's done. The loved ones of Tiara, including the children she shared with Campbell, were left heartbroken by the loss of the woman. Number 2. Busted on duty. Robert Evans Jr. used to serve as a police officer for Pennsylvania's Luzerne County, but like many cops before him, he strayed from the path of justice. During the summer of 2012, he illegally sold over 750 pills containing oxycodone while he was on duty. His clientele ranged from the average Joe walking down the street to fellow officers on the force. Usually, he'd keep the drugs inside his patrol car before a sale. During the investigation, the FBI discovered that Robert once drove one of his clients to a nearby town in order to buy his stock. Other times, he'd just pull out the drugs while at the Hughestown police station to sell them directly to a client. In July 2014, the United States District Court found Robert guilty. For his crimes, the 39-year-old was sentenced to serve 30 months in prison. Apparently, he was operating his small drug scheme for over a year before getting caught. As a former police officer, Robert took advantage of his position of power to get away with breaking the law in order to make a profit. Number 1. Amber Pacheco. In 2018, a rookie officer from North Miami Beach was terminated from her position. 26-year-old Amber Pacheco was later arrested after being accused of assaulting a pregnant woman. After starting her work as a cop in September 2017, she was on probation longer than most rookies because she struggled getting to work on time. Amber had difficulties remembering certain procedures, and according to her file, she also lacked situational awareness at times. During her short employment on the force, the woman had gotten into 3 separate car accidents while in her patrol vehicle. The pregnant woman, Ebony Murray, was walking down the road with her boyfriend one night when they met the officer. The victim claimed that the attack was completely random and that it came out of nowhere. Murray says Amber must have thought they were talking about her, but that wasn't the case. Suddenly, Amber jumped Murray and kicked her in the belly. After the encounter, she started having contractions and was forced to prematurely give birth to her son. Unfortunately, Amber's sentencing is unclear, but attacking a pregnant woman carries a minimum prison term of 21 months and a maximum of 15 years. Which of these cases shocked you the most? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger. Bye!